I'm Ian, 28, a software developer working remotely for a tech company in San Francisco. For 3 years, I've lived with my parents in Massachusetts, saving money while building my career and investments. On the surface, they seemed supportive, but control lurked beneath their smiles. When my younger sister Rebecca returned from college, everything changed at that fateful family dinner. Their ultimatum about my bedroom revealed who they really were and who I could become. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stick around to see how I turned their ultimatum into the best decision of my life. Growing up as the eldest child, in a middle-class family in suburban Massachusetts, shaped much of who I am today. Our 4-bedroom colonial house sat on a quarter-acre lot in Lexington, a quiet neighborhood with good schools and manicured lawns that my father Michael insisted must be maintained to perfection. The house itself wasn't extraordinary. White clapboard siding, black shutters, a modest front porch where my mother Elizabeth would drink her morning coffee, and a backyard just big enough for summer barbecues. It was home, though not always a comfortable one. My educational journey followed the path my parents had carefully mapped out. I excelled in math and science throughout school, earning a scholarship to Northeastern University where I completed my computer science degree. While many of my classmates moved to tech hubs after graduation, I made what seemed like a practical decision at the time. When I landed a fully remote position with a San Francisco startup, I chose to move back home temporarily to maximize my savings. The plan made financial sense. Living in my childhood bedroom would help me build a substantial nest egg before venturing out on my own. That decision proved more profitable than I initially expected. By living at home and paying a modest rent to my parents, $1,000 monthly, far below market rate, I managed to save nearly 70% of my 6-figure income. I lived frugally, invested in index funds, and a carefully selected portfolio of tech stocks that performed exceptionally well, and watched my savings grow month after month. My financial spreadsheets became my secret pride, columns of numbers that represented future freedom. My bedroom doubled as my home office for those 3 years. It wasn't spacious, but I'd made it functional. A standing desk positioned near the window overlooked the maple tree in our front yard. Dual monitors and an ergonomic chair were my main indulgences. The walls, once covered with posters of bands and video games, now held a whiteboard for project planning and a simple calendar. My bed tucked into the corner, almost an afterthought, in a space dedicated to productivity. The closet barely contained my modest wardrobe and the boxes of childhood memorabilia I couldn't bring myself to discard. My parents maintained an interesting dynamic between themselves and with their children. My father Michael, a logistics manager at a regional distribution center, brought his work persona home. Everything in our household ran according to his schedules and expectations. He wasn't physically intimidating average height with thinning hair and reading glasses that made him look scholarly, but his tone carried undeniable authority. Tough love was his parenting philosophy, which often translated to criticism disguised as guidance. "I'm only telling you this for your own good," became a phrase I learned to dread. My mother Elizabeth worked as an elementary school administrator, a job that seemed to drain her ability to assert herself at home. She'd occasionally disagree with my father in private, but publicly, she presented a united front. Her passive enabling of his behavior created a household where his word became unquestioned law. More concerning was her obvious favoritism toward my sister Rebecca. While she'd praised Rebecca's mediocre achievements effusively, my accomplishments received only perfunctory acknowledgement. "That's nice, dear. Have you seen the beautiful painting Rebecca made?" Despite being an adult with a successful career, living under my parents' roof meant adhering to their rules. Weekends involved mandatory family dinners where my father would interrogate me about work projects he couldn't understand, while my mother would serve her specialty dishes and make gentle inquiries about my non-existent dating life. I'd grown accustomed to this arrangement, focusing on the financial benefits rather than the emotional costs. My sister Rebecca was 4 years younger than me, and as different from me as siblings could be. While I gravitated toward logic and structure, Rebecca pursued artistic passions with enthusiasm but little discipline. Her academic career had been a series of changing majors and extended semesters, finally culminating in an art degree that took 6 years to complete. Throughout her life, my parents had rushed to her rescue whenever consequences loomed. Failed classes were met with tutors instead of accountability. Financial irresponsibility resulted in parental bailouts rather than budget lessons. Our sibling relationship had been strained since childhood. Rebecca had a habit of taking my possessions without permission: books, electronics, even money from my wallet, returning them damaged or not at all. When I complained, my parents dismissed my concerns. "Don't be selfish, Ian. She's your little sister." This pattern continued into adulthood, with boundaries ignored and entitlement encouraged. The announcement of her graduation and subsequent return home came during a Sunday phone call. My mother could barely contain her excitement, while my father spoke of clearing space in the garage for her art supplies. I maintained a neutral tone, congratulating Rebecca and asking about her plans. She mentioned vague aspirations of gallery showings and commission work, but nothing concrete. I remember hanging up the phone with a sense of unease I couldn't quite define. The financial arrangement I had with my parents seemed straightforward when we established it. I paid monthly rent, covered my own expenses, and contributed to household utilities. In return, I had the privacy needed for my work and the understanding that this was a temporary situation while I built my savings. What my parents didn't know was exactly how substantial those savings had become, or that I'd been researching the local real estate market with increasing interest. Property values in our area had been climbing steadily, and I'd established a relationship with a realtor who sent me listings before they went public. None of this seemed relevant to share with my family at the time, a decision that would prove fortuitous. Rebecca's return home arrived with the fanfare of a conquering hero. My parents spent an entire weekend preparing deep cleaning the house, preparing her favorite meals, and even replacing the bedding in her old room with a new organic cotton set in her preferred shade of teal. The day she arrived, my father left work early for the first time in years, and my mother baked 3 different desserts for the welcome dinner. I joined the celebration, helping carry Rebecca's seemingly endless boxes and suitcases from her friend's borrowed car. Her 4-year degree had somehow generated enough possessions to fill a small apartment. As I hauled the 3rd box labeled "Essential Supplies" up the stairs, Rebecca surveyed her childhood bedroom with a frown. "This room is even smaller than I remembered," she said, running her hand along the dresser. "How am I supposed to fit all my supplies in here? There's barely room for my easel." My mother rushed to soothe her. "We'll make space, honey. The important thing is that you're home now." That evening's dinner featured all of Rebecca's favorites: my mother's roast chicken with rosemary potatoes, homemade rolls, and 3 different vegetables that Rebecca mostly pushed around her plate. She dominated the conversation with stories of college friends and professors who had supposedly recognized her exceptional talent. My parents listened with rapt attention, asking questions that allowed her to elaborate further on her experiences. When I mentioned a challenging project I'd recently completed, the conversation quickly returned to Rebecca's plans. The first week established a pattern that would only intensify. Rebecca woke late, spent hours in the bathroom we shared, and spread her art supplies across common areas of the house. My carefully established work routine faced constant interruptions. Her music played loudly through thin walls, and she had a habit of barging into my room without knocking to borrow chargers, ask technical questions about her laptop, or simply chat when boredom struck. "Don't you work from home? What's the big deal?" she'd say when I explained I was in the middle of something important. "It's not like you have a real office to go to." The warning signs of trouble appeared in whispered conversations I wasn't meant to hear. One evening, passing my parents' partially open bedroom door, I caught fragments that made me pause. "She needs more than just that small room if she's going to establish herself artistically," my mother was saying. "We'll figure something out," my father replied. "Ian's been here for 3 years already. It's Rebecca's turn to get the support she needs." I continued to my room, unsettled by the implication. The next day, I noticed my mother measuring the dimensions of my workspace while I was on a lunch break. When questioned, she vaguely mentioned just thinking about some rearrangements. Rebecca's demands escalated alongside my parents' shifting attitude. She complained about the Wi-Fi speed affecting her portfolio uploads. She needed more shelf space for her supplies. The lighting in her room wasn't conducive to her artistic process. Each complaint met with immediate parental problem-solving, while my boundary attempts were labeled as uncooperative. My work began to suffer from the constant disruptions. During important video calls, Rebecca would vacuum the hallway or play music. My carefully organized desk would be disturbed if I left it unattended, art supplies appearing among my papers or coffee rings staining important documents. When I secured my room with a lock, my father confronted me about creating division in the family. The financial disparities in how my parents treated us became increasingly apparent. While I continued paying rent and utilities, Rebecca contributed nothing to household expenses. Instead, my parents covered her cell phone bill, car insurance, and daily expenses. One evening, helping my mother carry groceries, I noticed the receipt specialized art supplies and organic snacks had doubled their usual budget. The revelation about Rebecca's student debt came accidentally. A letter arrived addressed to my parents regarding a Parent Plus loan payment schedule. The envelope lay open on the kitchen counter while my mother prepared dinner. The sum was substantial, nearly $80,000, with monthly payments higher than my rent contribution. When I casually mentioned seeing the letter, my mother's expression tightened. "Your father and I are handling it," she said tersely. Rebecca's education was an investment in her future. My attempts to discuss the situation rationally met with defensive responses from all family members. When I suggested Rebecca contribute to household expenses, my father dismissed the idea immediately. "She's just getting started. You were established in your career when you moved back. It's completely different. Besides," my mother added, "her artistic work requires financial freedom to develop properly." The week before the confrontation that would change everything, several incidents pushed the tension to breaking point. Rebecca had scheduled what she called job interviews at local galleries, requiring my parents to drive her since her car was making a strange noise, a problem that mysteriously resolved when she wanted to meet friends. While helping my mother with a printer issue, I glimpsed Rebecca's social media page showing a shopping spree with friends, expensive art supplies, designer coffee, and lunch at an upscale restaurant, all posted during her supposed job search time. The caption thanked her parents for their support during her transitional period. That same evening, I discovered my expensive noise-canceling headphones critical for my work in the increasingly chaotic household broken on Rebecca's desk, covered in paint. When confronted, she shrugged. "I needed them for a sound installation experiment. Don't be so uptight. Mom and Dad will buy you new ones." They didn't. Instead, my father suggested I should be more generous with my sister during her creative development phase. The escalating situation prompted me to begin contingency planning. I viewed several apartments in nearby communities, calculating commute times and rent expenses against my savings. I updated my resume and explored job opportunities that might offer relocation packages. I said nothing of these plans to my family, maintaining the appearance of acceptance while preparing for independence. What I didn't yet know was how soon, and how dramatically, I would need these plans. My father's 55th birthday arrived amid the growing household tension. Despite the strain, I was determined to maintain family traditions and show the respect my father expected. I purchased an expensive watch he had mentioned months earlier, a significant investment that represented several days' pay. The morning of his birthday, I woke early to help my mother prepare his favorite breakfast, Belgian waffles with fresh berries and homemade whipped cream. The day proceeded pleasantly enough, with my father accepting birthday calls from relatives and friends, while Rebecca worked on what she called a commemorative art piece for him. I spent several hours organizing a slideshow of family photos for the evening celebration, carefully selecting images that highlighted happy moments throughout the years. The effort felt increasingly hollow as I searched for recent photos where everyone looked genuinely happy together. Dinner preparations began in earnest that afternoon. My mother prepared beef Wellington, my father's favorite special occasion meal, while I handled sides of roasted vegetables, garlic mashed potatoes, and a Caesar salad. Rebecca's contribution was limited to setting the table, a task she completed haphazardly while talking on her phone. The dining room looked festive with candles, and the good china my mother reserved for holidays and birthdays. The meal itself started on a positive note. My father was in an unusually good mood, appreciative of the food and the attention. He opened his gifts with uncharacteristic enthusiasm, expressing genuine pleasure at the watch I'd given him. "This is quite thoughtful, son," he said, examining the timepiece. "Very practical and stylish." Coming from him, this was effusive praise. We ate comfortably, the conversation flowing more naturally than it had in weeks. My mother shared amusing stories from her elementary school. My father discussed a successful project at work, and even Rebecca described her latest artistic concept without dominating the discussion. I found myself relaxing slightly, thinking perhaps the household tensions had been magnified by my own stress and perception. When my mother brought out the chocolate raspberry cake, another of my father's favorites, the atmosphere remained warm. We sang Happy Birthday, and my father made a show of deliberating over the perfect wish before blowing out the candles. As we enjoyed the rich dessert, my mother cleared her throat in that particular way that indicated she had an announcement. I assumed it would be a toast or perhaps news about a planned celebration with extended family. "Now that we're all together," she began, smiling brightly, "I wanted to share some exciting news about a change that will benefit the whole family." She paused, looking toward my father, who nodded encouragingly. Rebecca suddenly became very interested in her cake, studying it with unusual intensity. "Rebecca will be taking your room, Ian," my mother continued, her tone suggesting this was a wonderful development. "She needs more space for her artistic pursuits, and your room has that lovely northern exposure that's perfect for her work." The statement hung in the air for a moment as I processed what she was saying. I set my fork down carefully, swallowed my bite of cake, and looked at my mother directly. "My room? The one with my office set up where I work 40+ hours weekly?" "Yes, dear. We thought since you've been established for so long, you wouldn't mind moving to Rebecca's room. It's only slightly smaller, and you don't need all that space for your computer work." Rebecca finally looked up, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "The natural light will make such a difference for my oil painting technique. My current room is too dark for proper color work." I took a measured breath. "When exactly is this move supposed to happen?" My father interjected then, his good mood visibly diminishing. "This weekend. Rebecca needs to establish her workspace immediately if she's going to meet potential gallery deadlines." "I see. And was anyone planning to discuss this with me before deciding? Moving my entire work setup will take time and planning. I have client meetings scheduled." "Oh, Ian, don't be so dramatic," my mother interrupted. "It's just moving across the hallway. You can handle it in an afternoon. My equipment is carefully calibrated. I have ergonomic considerations from my workspace. This isn't as simple as—" My father's hand slammed down on the table, causing the dessert plates to jump and coffee to slosh from cups. His face flushed with the immediate anger I recognized from childhood confrontations. "Enough. This decision has been made. Your sister needs the room, and as long as you live under our roof, you'll respect our decisions about this house." I met his gaze steadily. "I understand it's your house, but I'm a paying tenant with an established workspace. Could we at least discuss timeline and logistics? Perhaps look at alternatives that would work for everyone?" His voice lowered to that dangerous, quiet tone that had intimidated me throughout childhood. "Let me be perfectly clear. You have two options here. Agree to this change or get out of this house. There's nothing to discuss." My mother placed a hand on my arm. "Ian, please. This is your father's birthday. Let's not spoil it with arguments. Rebecca really needs this for her art career to flourish." I looked around the table at their faces. My father's barely contained anger, my mother's pleading expression, and Rebecca's poorly concealed satisfaction. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. The pattern of my entire relationship with my family crystallized with perfect clarity. No matter what I contributed, what I achieved, or how reasonably I behaved, I would always be secondary to Rebecca's wants. Instead of the hurt or anger they clearly expected, I felt an odd sense of calm descend. A slight smile formed on my lips, confusing them visibly. My father's brow furrowed, and Rebecca's triumphant expression faltered. "All right," I said simply. "I understand completely now. I'll have my things out by the weekend." The table fell silent. My mother recovered first. "That's not what we meant, Ian. We just want you to move to Rebecca's room, not leave entirely. I maintained my calm demeanor. I think Dad was quite clear about my options. I've made my choice. My father, thrown off balance by my unexpected reaction, backpedaled slightly. Don't be hasty. We're just asking for a simple room switch. No, you gave an ultimatum, I corrected gently, and I'm accepting one of the options presented. Now, who'd like more cake? It really is delicious, Mom. The remainder of the evening passed in uncomfortable conversation. My family seemed unsure how to proceed after my calm acceptance, expecting perhaps a typical argument that never materialized. As we cleaned up after dinner, Rebecca approached me with uncharacteristic hesitation. You're not really moving out, are you? Where would you even go? I smiled at her. Don't worry about me. Worry about getting your portfolio ready for those galleries. That night, as I lay in bed looking at the ceiling I'd stared at since childhood, I began making mental lists. Not of grievances or emotional hurts, but practical steps toward a freedom I suddenly realized had been within my reach for longer than I'd acknowledged. The decision that had been thrust upon me now felt like an opportunity disguised as rejection. The morning after my father's birthday dinner, I accessed my financial portfolio while the house was still quiet. The numbers confirmed what I already knew. Years of disciplined saving and strategic investing had built a substantial nest egg that few 28-year-olds could claim. My tech company stock options had tripled in value since our last funding round. My index fund investments had performed steadily through market fluctuations. My cryptocurrency holdings, a small but significant portion of my portfolio, had appreciated beyond even my optimistic projections. I had intentionally downplayed my financial situation to my family, partly from private nature and partly from an instinctive sense that transparency might change our dynamics. I drove the same modest Honda I'd owned since college, dressed in simple clothing, and rarely made expensive purchases. My parents assumed I was saving something for the future, but had no concept of the actual figures involved. A quick calculation confirmed I had enough for a 20% down payment on a property in our area, with plenty remaining for closing costs, furnishing, and an emergency fund that would cover 6 months of expenses if my employment situation changed. My credit score, which I monitored religiously, stood at 820, well above what lenders considered excellent. I placed a call to Amanda, the real estate agent I'd been working with casually for nearly a year. She had been sending me property listings and market analyses, understanding I was in a research phase rather than actively looking. Our conversation that morning changed everything. I'm ready to move forward immediately, I told her. My parameters have shifted. I need something available for quick closing, preferably in my current neighborhood. That's quite a change from our last conversation, she replied. Any particular area within the neighborhood? I hesitated only briefly. Actually, proximity to my parents' address would be ideal, within walking distance if possible. Amanda promised to compile options by that afternoon. I cleared my work calendar for an extended lunch break and waited. When her email arrived 3 hours later, one property immediately caught my attention, a colonial-style home directly across the street from my parents' house. It had been listed just 2 days earlier, following a relocation by the previous owners who had already moved out of state. The property was larger than my parents' home, with 4 bedrooms, a dedicated office space, and a recently renovated kitchen. Most importantly, it offered an unobstructed view of my parents' front door from the master bedroom and living room. The asking price was at the upper end of my budget but still manageable. The listing mentioned the owners were motivated to sell quickly. I called Amanda immediately and scheduled a viewing for that afternoon. Walking through the house felt surreal. From the front windows, I could see my childhood home where my family continued their day, unaware I was standing across the street contemplating the ultimate statement of independence. The house itself exceeded my expectations. Hardwood floors throughout, ample natural light, updated electrical that could handle my technology needs, and a backyard with mature maple trees providing privacy and shade. "What do you think?" Amanda asked, watching my expression as I stood in what could become my home office. "I want to make an offer," I replied. "All cash, 10% below asking, with a request for closing within 2 weeks. I'll waive inspection contingencies if they accept." Amanda's eyebrows rose. All cash? That's unexpected for a first-time buyer your age. I smiled. I've been planning longer than anyone realized. My aggressive offer produced immediate results. By evening, the sellers had countered with a 5% reduction from asking price and agreement to the expedited closing. I accepted without hesitation. The paperwork process began that night with electronic signatures flying back and forth between parties eager to complete the transaction. Meanwhile, at home, I maintained a calm facade. I began packing my possessions methodically each evening, carefully wrapping electronics and organizing books into boxes labeled simply office or personal. When my mother inquired about my plans, I responded with vague mentions of a place nearby and temporary arrangements until I find something permanent. Rebecca had already begun measuring my room and discussing paint colors with our mother, barely containing her excitement about claiming the larger space. I arranged for a storage unit rental as a cover story, having a small amount of furniture and boxes delivered there while the majority of my preparations happened behind the scenes. The closing process moved with surprising speed. My financial documentation was impeccable, the title search uncomplicated, and the sellers motivated. 10 days after making my offer a timeline that impressed even Amanda, I signed the final paperwork and received the keys to my new home. That same day, I arranged for movers to arrive the following morning. I completed the last of my packing that evening, dismantling my work setup with careful attention to cable management and component protection. My parents watched with a mixture of concern and confusion, still not fully believing I would actually leave. Rebecca had already moved some art supplies into her new studio space, claiming corners of my room before I had even vacated it completely. "You're really going through with this?" my mother asked, standing in my doorway as I taped shut the final box. "Yes," I replied simply. "It's for the best. Where will you go? Do you need help with first month's rent somewhere?" My father's offer came with the assumption I would struggle financially without their support. "I've got it covered. But thank you," I said, maintaining my composure. "Everything's arranged." The next morning, the moving truck arrived precisely at 8 o'clock. I directed the movers efficiently, having prepared an inventory and labeling system that made the process straightforward. My parents stood on the front porch, watching with growing confusion as substantially more boxes emerged than they had realized existed. Rebecca remained in her room, apparently uninterested in the practicalities of the transition she had instigated. The pivotal moment arrived when I instructed the moving truck to drive exactly 400 feet directly across the street to the house, with the sold sign freshly installed on the front lawn. I watched my parents' expressions transform as realization dawned. My father's jaw literally dropped, while my mother's hand flew to her mouth in shock. I approached them one last time before crossing the street to my new home. "I've bought the Montgomery house," I said simply. "I'll be right across the street if you need me." "You bought a house?" My father seemed unable to process the information. "How could you possibly afford?" "I've been saving and investing for years," I interrupted gently. "It turns out I'm quite good with money. The closing was finalized yesterday." "But that's a 4-bedroom colonial," my mother stammered. "It's larger than our house." "Yes," I confirmed with a small smile. "It has a dedicated office space too, perfect for my needs." I left them standing there, expressions frozen in disbelief, as I walked across the street to direct the placement of furniture in my new home. Through the front windows I could see them still on the porch, having what appeared to be an animated discussion. Rebecca had finally emerged, looking back and forth between our parents and the moving activity at my new residence. That evening, after the movers had left and I'd unpacked essentials, my doorbell rang. My father stood there, his expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and something that might have been respect. "You could have told us," he said without preamble. "Would it have changed anything?" I asked. He had no response to that. After an uncomfortable silence, he simply nodded once and turned to leave. "Your mother wants to know if you'll still come for Sunday dinners." "We'll see," I replied. "I'll need some time to settle in first." As he walked back across the street, his posture seemed somehow diminished. I closed the door on my childhood home and turned to face my new beginning, feeling lighter than I had in years. The first week in my new home passed in a blur of unpacking, arranging furniture, and setting up my work environment. From my front windows, I observed the comings and goings across the street, with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying an unfamiliar culture. My parents made several aborted attempts to visit, approaching my driveway before turning back, apparently unable to decide on the right approach. Rebecca remained conspicuously absent from these attempts. On the 8th day, my mother finally gathered her courage and knocked on my door, holding a houseplant as an apparent peace offering. Her eyes widened as she stepped into my foyer, taking in the hardwood floors, high ceilings, and modern furnishings I'd selected. "This is quite lovely," she managed, handing me the potted fern, a housewarming gift. "Thank you," I replied, accepting it politely. "Would you like a tour?" The awkward walkthrough that followed revealed the genuine gulf between her perception of me and reality. Each room elicited surprised comments about my taste or questions about how I'd managed to furnish the space so quickly. When we reached my home office, a space larger than my previous bedroom, with custom shelving and a view of the neighborhood, she seemed genuinely stunned. "Your father and I had no idea you were in a position to do something like this," she finally said, seated at my kitchen island with the tea I'd offered. "I never felt the need to share the details of my finances," I replied evenly. "It didn't seem relevant to our arrangement." She flinched slightly at that. "About the room situation. We didn't mean for you to feel unwelcome. We just thought that Rebecca's needs superseded mine." Yes, that was quite clear. The conversation remained strained, ending with her uncertain invitation to still consider myself welcome in their home. I thanked her politely without committing to anything specific. Over the following weeks, word spread through the neighborhood about the unusual situation, the adult son who purchased the house across from his parents following some unspecified family disagreement. Neighbors I barely knew suddenly found reasons to introduce themselves, curiosity thinly veiled behind welcome baskets and invitations to community events. My extended family reached out through texts and calls, versions of the story having spread through the grapevine. Some expressed support for my independence, while others gently suggested reconciliation would be appropriate. I maintained polite but non-committal responses to all, neither defending my decision nor criticizing my family's actions. Across the street, Rebecca's situation began showing visible signs of strain. My former bedroom, now converted to her studio, frequently displayed chaotic activity visible through the windows. Lights burned late into the night, and occasionally raised voices carried across the quiet neighborhood streets. Twice I observed her friends arriving with bottles of wine midweek, the subsequent gathering becoming progressively louder as evening advanced. From my occasional interactions with neighbors, I learned that Rebecca's job search remained unsuccessful. Mrs. Hendricks from next door mentioned seeing her return from interviews by mid-morning, hours before such meetings would normally conclude. Mr. Patterson, whose son owned a gallery in the city, mentioned Rebecca had developed a reputation for unrealistic expectations regarding her work, demanding featured placement despite being an unknown artist. The physical appearance of my childhood home began showing subtle signs of neglect. The lawn, once my father's pride, grew slightly too long between mowings. The flower beds my mother had meticulously maintained showed weeds emerging between perennials. The gutters remained clogged with autumn leaves well into winter, creating icicles that damaged the fascia. During a chance encounter at the local supermarket, my mother mentioned offhandedly that my father had been experiencing some discomfort that required medical attention. Reading between the lines of her careful phrasing, I gathered that stress was manifesting physically in ways that concerned her. She didn't directly ask for help but lingered near the produce section longer than necessary, perhaps hoping I would offer something. "I hope he feels better soon," I said sincerely. "Make sure he's following doctor's orders." The financial consequences of their decisions became increasingly apparent through oblique comments and observations. During one of his early morning dog walks, our neighbor Roger mentioned my father had inquired about refinancing options, citing unexpected expenses. My mother began using coupons at the grocery store, something she had previously considered beneath her standards. Rebecca's art supplies continued arriving in packages, while my mother's car developed a concerning sound that remained unaddressed. The most revealing insight came from my Aunt Susan during a phone call. "Your parents had to dip into their retirement accounts," she confided after extracting a promise of discretion. "Something about helping Rebecca establish her career and unexpected household expenses. Your father's worried about penalties, but they didn't have other options." I established a simple morning routine that coincidentally aligned with my parents' departure times. Each morning, at precisely 7:30, I would sit on my front porch with coffee, newspaper, and laptop, appearing absorbed in starting my workday. This timing perfectly matched when my father backed out of their driveway to head to work, followed 15 minutes later by my mother. Without fail, I would look up, smile pleasantly, and wave with a cheerful, "Good morning," as their cars passed. The psychological impact of this daily ritual became evident in subtle ways. My father's expression grew increasingly grim, while my mother's attempts at returning the greeting became strained. Occasionally, Rebecca would watch this exchange from an upstairs window, her expression unreadable from that distance. Neighbors noticed the dynamic, of course. Mrs. Hendricks commented one day while retrieving her mail, "It's like watching the world's politest Cold War. Your father looks like he's swallowing lemons every morning when you wave." I just smiled. We're all adults maintaining cordial relations. Nothing unusual about that. As months passed, the contrast between our properties became increasingly stark. I invested in tasteful landscaping, exterior painting, and subtle outdoor lighting that enhanced my home's curb appeal. Meanwhile, my parents' house showed increasing signs of deferred maintenance, peeling paint on the trim, a sagging gutter, and the remains of Christmas decorations still visible in March. Inside my new home, I was building the life I had postponed. I furnished rooms thoughtfully rather than expeditiously, created spaces for hobbies I'd neglected while living with my parents, and even began dating someone I met at a local coffee shop. The independence that had been thrust upon me unwillingly had become the foundation for genuine happiness and self-discovery. 6 months after I moved across the street, the situation at my childhood home reached crisis point. Through neighborhood channels, I learned my father had been laid off during company downsizing, a victim of middle management cuts that eliminated his entire department. The timing couldn't have been worse for my family, with Rebecca still unemployed and the household already under financial strain. The news came first through Roger, whose wife worked in human resources at the same company. "Tough break for your dad," he mentioned during our regular Tuesday morning neighborly chat. "Whole logistics department gone with just 2 weeks severance. Economy's rough right now." I thanked him for the information without revealing I hadn't been informed directly. That evening, watching through my living room window, I observed unusual activity at my parents' house. My father arrived home mid-afternoon, rather than his usual 6 o'clock, carrying a cardboard box that likely contained personal items from his office. My mother's car pulled in shortly after, suggesting she had left work early as well. No lights appeared in the windows that evening, though silhouettes occasionally passed behind closed curtains. 3 days later, my mother appeared at my door. The transformation in her appearance was shocking. Her normally perfect hair showed gray roots, her clothing looked slept in, and the lines around her eyes had deepened considerably. She stood on my porch, arms wrapped protectively around herself. "May I come in?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside immediately, concern overriding the careful distance I'd maintained. Once seated at my kitchen island, the same spot as her previous visit, she broke down completely, tears flowing unchecked. "Everything's falling apart," she confessed between sobs. "Your father lost his job. The severance barely covers next month's mortgage. Rebecca's art isn't selling, and she refuses to look for regular work because it would compromise her creative integrity. The credit cards are maxed out, and the retirement accounts are nearly depleted from penalties and withdrawals." I listened silently, offering tissues and water while she continued. "The house needs repairs we can't afford. The hot water heater is failing, and the roof has a leak in the northwest corner. Your father's blood pressure is dangerously high, and he's refusing to fill prescriptions because of the cost." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm not asking for money. I needed someone to know." My carefully constructed emotional walls began crumbling at the sight of my mother's genuine despair. The satisfaction I'd felt watching their situation deteriorate suddenly seemed petty and hollow. "What about Rebecca?" I asked gently. "Is she aware of how serious things have become?" My mother's expression hardened slightly. "She says we're being dramatic, that the universe will provide for artists who stay true to their vision. She's planning to convert the dining room into additional studio space because apparently her current room, your old room, doesn't have the right creative energy anymore." After my mother left, I found myself in an unexpected state of internal conflict. The rational part of me recognized that my parents were facing the natural consequences of their choices and favoritism. The emotional part, the part I'd suppressed during months of polite morning waves, remembered moments of genuine family connection before Rebecca's return had disrupted the equilibrium. I called Marcus, my closest friend since college, and the only person who knew the complete story of my family situation. Unlike others who had offered generic advice about forgiveness, Marcus had supported my decision for independence without judgment. "They're in trouble," I explained after relating my mother's visit. "Real trouble, not just inconvenience. And you're feeling responsible somehow," Marcus observed. "Despite everything, not responsible exactly, but satisfied in a way that feels wrong now. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense. Revenge is sweet until it isn't. The question is, what do you want your relationship with them to be long-term? This could be an opportunity to redefine things on your terms." That conversation sparked days of reflection about family obligation, boundaries, and the fine line between justice and vengeance. I found myself looking through old family photos, camping trips where my father had taught me to fish, school science fairs where my mother had helped with displays, holidays that held genuine warmth before comparisons and favoritism became our family's defining dynamic. After careful consideration, I texted my parents. "Dinner at my house, Friday at 7. Just the two of you, please." The response came almost immediately, a simple, "We'll be there," from my mother's phone. I spent Thursday evening preparing my father's favorite meal, not the beef Wellington of special occasions, but the simple pot roast with root vegetables he preferred for regular Sunday dinners. I set the table with care, opened a decent bottle of wine to breathe, and waited. They arrived precisely at 7, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. My father had clearly made an effort, freshly shaved, wearing a button-down shirt that hung slightly loose on his frame. My mother had applied makeup that didn't quite conceal her exhaustion. I welcomed them warmly, taking their coats and offering drinks before seating them at my dining table. The initial conversation remained cautious, focused on neutral topics like neighborhood news and the unseasonably warm weather. As I served the pot roast, my father cleared his throat. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," he said, gesturing to the meal. "It's no trouble," I replied. I wanted to create the right atmosphere for an honest conversation. That simple statement cleared the air immediately. The pretense of normalcy dissolved as we all acknowledged the elephant in the room. I took a deep breath and began. "I know about Dad's job situation and the financial difficulties you're facing. I understand the house needs repairs, and Rebecca's behavior is complicating things further." My parents exchanged glances but didn't deny anything. "Before we discuss any of that, I need to address what happened 6 months ago," I continued. The ultimatum about my room wasn't just about space. It was the culmination of a pattern that's existed since childhood, Rebecca's wants automatically outweighing my needs, regardless of circumstances or consequences. My father started to interject, but my mother placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. That pattern taught me that my position in the family was conditional, while hers was absolute. It taught me that my contributions, financial or otherwise, were expected but not valued. And ultimately, it taught me that I needed to establish boundaries that couldn't be crossed. I paused, taking a sip of water before continuing. "I don't regret buying this house or moving out. It was necessary for my self-respect and long-term happiness. What I do regret is the satisfaction I took in watching things fall apart for you. That wasn't worthy of who I want to be." My father's expression had transformed during my speech, the defensive anger replaced by something more complex, perhaps the beginning of understanding. "We never intended to make you feel less important," my mother offered tentatively. "Intentions matter less than patterns," I replied. And the pattern was clear. But that's not why I invited you tonight. I invited you because despite everything, you're still my family, and I'm in a position to help with conditions. I outlined a practical proposal. I would assist with critical house repairs, connect my father with contacts in my professional network for job opportunities, and help create a realistic financial recovery plan. In exchange, they would attend family counseling sessions with me to address the underlying dynamic that had created our current situation. Rebecca would not be included initially. This was about rebuilding the foundation of trust between us first. And Rebecca? My father asked, finally finding his voice. She's still our daughter. We can't just... Rebecca needs consequences and boundaries, I interrupted firmly. She needs to contribute to the household or find her own place. My assistance is conditional on you, establishing clear expectations for her. I won't subsidize the same patterns that damaged our family. The conversation continued late into the evening, painful at times but ultimately productive. By the time they left, we had a tentative agreement and plans for next steps. The relief in my mother's posture was visible, while my father seemed to be processing everything still, his goodbye handshake firmer than it had been in years. The following week brought a confrontation I hadn't planned, but perhaps should have anticipated. Rebecca appeared at my door unannounced, eyes blazing with indignation. "How dare you give our parents ultimatums about me?" she demanded, pushing past me into the foyer. "You've always been jealous of my creative gifts. Now you're using money to control everyone." Rather than defending myself, I invited her to sit in my living room with its clear view of our parents' house. "Do you see that roof?" I asked, pointing to the visible water damage. "Or the cracking driveway? Or Dad's car that's needed transmission work for months? Your creative gifts haven't contributed to addressing any of that. That's not my responsibility. Artists need support during their developmental period. Mom and Dad understand that. What they understand," I replied calmly, "is that they've enabled behavior that's hurting everyone, including you. Real artists find ways to support themselves while developing their craft. They don't bankrupt their parents and treat siblings like obstacles." The conversation that followed was brutally honest. I detailed the financial reality our parents faced, the health concerns my father was hiding, and the untenable situation they had created together. Rebecca's initial anger gave way to defensive rationalization, then to grudging recognition, and finally to tearful acknowledgement. "I don't know how to do anything else," she admitted, suddenly looking much younger. "My degree feels worthless. The galleries say my work isn't distinctive enough yet. I've been pretending everything's fine because I don't know how to fix it." "No one expects you to fix everything immediately," I told her. "But adults contribute rather than just consume. Start with a part-time job, any job, while continuing your art. Help with household expenses. Be a daughter and sister, not just a perpetual dependent." She left without promises, but the seed had been planted. 3 days later, she texted a screenshot of an online application to a local frame shop that was hiring. It wasn't a transformation, but it was a start. The following months brought gradual but meaningful changes to our family dynamic. The critical house repairs were completed. First, a new roof installed before winter, the water heater replaced, and the electrical system updated to handle modern demands safely. I connected my father with a former colleague who needed an operations consultant for his growing business, providing both income and restored purpose that visibly improved his health and outlook. Our family counseling sessions, while initially awkward and defensive, eventually created space for honest conversations that should have happened years earlier. My mother tearfully acknowledged the favoritism she had shown toward Rebecca, tracing it to her own childhood experiences as the less favored daughter. My father confronted his tendency to use control and ultimatums rather than communication and compromise. I recognized my pattern of silent accommodation, followed by dramatic breaks, rather than establishing ongoing boundaries. The most surprising development came from Rebecca herself. After securing the frame shop position, she discovered an unexpected talent for helping customers select complementary framing for their artwork. This led to connections with local artists, eventually resulting in a weekend position as an assistant at a gallery, the same gallery that had rejected her own work months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. but the experience gave her insight into selection criteria and presentation that her education had never provided. She found a small apartment with a roommate, moving out 6 weeks after our confrontation. The distance seemed to improve her relationship with our parents rather than damaging it. Without the daily enabling, she began developing the independence she had resisted for so long. Her art continued, but with a more disciplined approach, informed by her gallery experience. New boundaries transformed our family gatherings. We established Sunday dinners as a weekly tradition, rotating between our homes with each person contributing to the meal. These gatherings had clear start and end times, respectful conversations, and zero tolerance for the old patterns of favoritism or dismissal. When backsliding occurred, as it inevitably did, we had developed language to address it immediately, rather than letting resentment build. My parents' financial situation stabilized gradually. With Rebecca contributing to her own support and my father's new consulting work proving lucrative, they began rebuilding their retirement savings. The house regained its well-maintained appearance as resources became available for regular upkeep. My mother even returned to gardening, finding joy in the flower beds that had been neglected during the crisis period. My personal growth paralleled these family changes. The anger that had driven my good morning ritual transformed into genuine well wishes. The satisfaction in watching their struggles gave way to contentment in seeing healthy boundaries maintained and respected. I developed a relationship with Allison, the woman from the coffee shop, that deepened into something meaningful precisely because I had learned to articulate needs and boundaries clearly. The neighborhood perception shifted as well. What had been viewed as an unusual family drama became recognized as a successful navigation of adult family relationships. Several neighbors with adult children living at home sought advice about establishing clearer expectations and boundaries. My father, surprisingly, became an advocate for open financial discussions with adult children, a complete reversal from his previous approach. My career flourished in the stable environment I had created. Without daily disruptions and with a dedicated office space, my productivity increased significantly. A promotion followed, along with options for additional company equity that further strengthened my financial position. I began mentoring junior developers, finding unexpected satisfaction in helping others navigate professional challenges. Rebecca's professional path took an unexpected turn when she combined her artistic background with newly developed business skills. She created a consultation service for artists seeking gallery representation, translating between creative and commercial perspectives. Her own art evolved into mixed media work that incorporated themes of transformation and perspective work that eventually earned gallery placement on its own merits rather than through family pressure. On the 1-year anniversary of my house purchase, we gathered for a special dinner at my home. The contrast with the previous year's birthday dinner for my father couldn't have been more profound. Where tension and hidden agendas had dominated then, honest communication and mutual respect prevailed now. My father raised his glass in a toast that acknowledged the journey. To boundaries that seemed like endings but became beginnings instead, he said, meeting my eyes directly. And to the son who had the courage to establish them, even when it hurt. The path we traveled contained painful but necessary lessons about family relationships, self-worth, and authentic connection. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's essential for genuine relationships rather than codependent patterns. I recognized that love without respect creates dependency, not family bonds. Most importantly, I discovered that forgiveness is possible without forgetting the lessons that difficult experiences teach. Looking back now, that ultimatum at the family dinner table was the catalyst for positive change that might never have happened otherwise. The command to give up my room or leave became an unexpected gift permission to prioritize my own well-being and establish the life I deserved. Sometimes the most painful moments contain the seeds of necessary transformation, if we have the courage to nurture them. What boundaries have you needed to establish in your own life? Have you ever faced a family ultimatum that unexpectedly led to positive change? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about navigating complicated family dynamics. I'm grateful for each of you who took the time to listen to my journey. May it help you find clarity in your own.